Welcome, everyone. My name is Taiwo Afolabi. I am the creator and the host of the series, People, Planet, and Performance from Africa to the World. Good day to you, wherever you may be joining us, and welcome to the second episode in this 7-part series. I am dialing in today from Regina, at the University of Regina, where I serve as the Canada Researcher in Socially Engaged Theatre and the Director of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre, and also an Associate Professor. The university and the center is situated on the territories of the Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Mischief Nations, here in Regina, Saskatchewan, in Canada. Today's episode is focusing on Ecotheatre. In fact, the title is Ecotheatre, Decolonizing the Colonized Narrative. In the first episode with Aliyah Kassam, Aliyah and I really set the stage by really asking ourselves the questions around how did we get here and how do we move forward. In fact, we were interested in exploring, and we did explore some of the key ideas around things we need to think about when it comes to climate justice, planetary crisis, and sustainability in the arts as it concerns the African continent. So today I have Wood Ogutu and Jehoshaphat Philip Sabarov, and they're going to introduce themselves shortly. And we're going to be diving into what does decolonization means? How can we and how has different performing artists, communities, and artists in general find ways in their practice to decolonize the colonized narrative. We're going to be asking questions such as, in what ways can the colonized narratives be decolonized? What are some of the values guiding Africa's framing and thinking about climate change? And how can environmental stewardship and sustainability be recentered in African theater? One of the key things we noted in the first episode is the fact that these issues are not peculiar to a side of the world. It's a global issue, and the awareness and awakening that is coming or that has come from the global north, really, we had all of that awareness awakening in the global south, particularly on the African continent, in the context of this series, long time ago. And so we're really interested in really diving deep into those key questions as it relates to this topic. I'd like to thank HowlRound for creating the space for having this conversation. This entire series is meant to complement the already existing programming around this subject matter. I also want to thank the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts for their partnership, Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina, and Theatre Emissions International, our theater company partner. Also, I'm saying thanks to Flo Gomez. She's the glue that holds everything together. She's coordinating and sort of managing this project on our end. So thank you to Flo. And thank you to our interpreters, Ingrid and Trani. Thank you for coming today. And also we have live captioning happening. So we hope that our listeners, our viewers can take opportunity of that should they need that. Just to also mention that if you have any question, please feel free to send that to us. And as you're watching, and it will get across to us. So with that, I'd like to bring our two panelists today, Jehoshaphat Philip Saber and Wood Ogutu. Maybe we'll start in that way, and I just wanted both of them to introduce themselves, and after that, we'll move on to the next thing. So over to you. We'll start with Jehoshaphat, and then we'll move on to Wood Ogutu.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wait, let me try something. I can't hear myself, so let me change my headset.
Okay.
So
maybe
if Wood continue so that I can change my headset.
Okay. Wood Ogutu, could you maybe let's start with you, and then we come to Jehoshaphat.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Moriah Wood Ogutu. The word stands for son of Ogutu, and I'm a theater maker, a writer, and also my work is embedded within the practice of orature. And I work in Nairobi, based in Nairobi, but also regionally within the country. And here I run two projects. One is called Maabara, which is Maabara stands for Chumba cha Majaribio in Kiswahili, which means a room to try it out. So it's an incubator program with different things within it, supporting arts, but also other areas. So we have also an upcoming farming project also, and residencies, as well as Maabara Exchange, which is about knowledge, practice, and Skillshare. And then there is Panda Shuka, which means up and down for Kiswahili, which then holds my portfolio as an artist. And my art practice has been started, I would say, 30 years ago, but professionally 15 years ago. And that encompasses, my work as a theater maker, writer, and storyteller. That's that's me.
Thank you so much, Moriah Wood Ogutu, and thanks for we talked about that yesterday. Thank you for sharing that with us. Kofi, did you want to go? Can you hear us, Kofi? Jehoshaphat? Philip Saber, can you hear us? Can you say something? We can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, yes.
Okay, all right. My name is Jehoshaphat Philip Saber. I like to go by Kofi Shaphat. I'm from the University of Cape Coast. I am a recording engineer, but currently I work on a DAAD funded school named Performance Stabilities in West Africa. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kofi. What we want to start today, Moriah Wood Ogutu has generously offered to do an excerpt of some of their writing, one of their writings rather. So I'll pass it on to you because I'm really excited. Okay. You've kind of put him in suspense. So I took the challenge. So over to you as a way to get us started to share your work with us.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to read from an excerpt of a project I'm working on. It's a long-term project. It's part of a practice I call literary performance practice, which is about how does the dialogue between orature and literature, where often orature is seen as being under literature, but in this practice is saying how there's no hierarchy. They're each their own practices with their own canon, with their own history, with their own ways of being and ways of knowing. And so this project also was for me a way of starting to frame my thoughts and ideas around what exactly is decolonial? What does it mean? What like when you say to, to an institution or to someone to decolonize, like what labor are you asking the mind to do? So I'll read an excerpt for that for a short. The ocean will always try to pull you in is the title of the project. I can hear inside my head the call of the Abyssinian nightjar, a soloist piercing the blackness of my tropical nightmare. While traveling in Zwane, one of the islands that form the Comoros archipelago, I made a surprising and disturbing discovery about myself. I am living in someone else's imagination. Try to imagine finding out that your thoughts, opinions, philosophies, personalities, identities, desires, dreams, nightmares, beliefs, preferences, and cravings, that all of them belong to someone else. Try to imagine the awareness of certain inconsistencies, openings into lived experiences that are not your own, recurring dreams that do not reflect your library of experiences. Imagine having memories and associations that are not your own. Try to imagine not knowing who this someone else is, where they are from, whether they are an individual or a collective, a being or an entity. Try to imagine not knowing how they managed to fit you into their imagination. How did they keep you confined for such a long time? Try to imagine finding out that their opinions of you become your reality. With these thoughts, I can feel the walls of my stomach twitching and aching. So I listen to the call in my head, the call of a Abyssinian nightjar, a soloist, piercing the blackness of my tropical nightmare. The Comorian beach at night is a place of disaffection, a place of alabaster spirits, nameless shadows, black cats clawing at your bare back, sea monsters resting under the blackness of night, desirous cephalopods tormented by unquenchable wanting, restless genie explained away as hallucinations caused by loneliness, mumblings, whispers, murmurs, voices without the bodies that made them, mapepo, treacherous, disgruntled spirit with changeable forms, fabricated in the minds of coastalians to keep their footfalls away from the coastline at night. I walk every night in defiance of these coastal myths of old. I was in love with the emptiness of the beach at night. It helped me clear my mind, preparing room to wrestle with my unsettling discovery and plot a quest, a long and difficult journey in search of something I cannot yet articulate. I could say it's a frantic and desperate search for how to liberate my imagination. But how do you escape a prison without bars? And even if you manage to escape such a prison, how would you know that you have achieved liberty? All my conceptions of reality, the meanings that drove my actions, came from the imaginations of someone else. And now I was drifting unanchored. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is, yeah, a lot of things to think about. And thanks for setting the context around orature and literature, because I'm going to be asking you that question, obviously, as we move forward. As I'm listening to you, I'm just really, you're giving us an image of someone, reflecting on where they're at and wanting to get out of that, right? It's a struggle. It's really interesting to see that you carefully, painted that picture of someone trying to understand why this, and because you've given us the context of orature and literature, I just kept thinking about historicism, rehistorifying, right? Restorification and all of that. And we're going to come to that in the talk today. Part of the practice that I started in the first episode is to to share with our viewers works of two artists on the continent, and hopefully folks can go back, can check more about their work. The first person I want to mention is Ida Muluneh. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. They did a project called Water Life. Ida Mulune is an award-winning photographer and artist. And they chose the region they call Afar region of northern Ethiopia, one of the worst, driest, and hottest areas, as the location for a photo shoot about water. So, and the project is titled Water Lives. For me, the project is not just only about water, but it also shows the implication of drought and all of that within the context and how that affects women, children in that region, and of course on the continent. We know that right now, our world, we're experiencing high level of drought right now, even here in Canada. So I just wanted to shed light to just put a spotlight on Ida Muluni's work. The second person I want to mention is Aisha Maiga. I do hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. They did a project called Above Water. They're a filmmaker from Senegal. And when I was in Senegal some couple of weeks ago, just I think 2 or 3 weeks ago now, it's really interesting to see when you hear about a project and then you actually see yourself in that country. It's really interesting to see the importance of that work itself. Like it's really evident right in front of your eyes to see, wow, I can see the connection of of the work, the film itself, and of course to the realities in the country and beyond Senegal to the entire continent. So I just wanted to shed that light on both Aisha Maiga's work titled Above Water, and of course Ida Muluni's work, Water. With that, let's move on. So I want to start with just a minute here. I'm trying to get to my note. With Muraya Wood Ogutu. What does decolonization mean to you? I know you've talked about this, your work, you've written about this. So this is sort of your harem, quote and unquote. What does this mean to you, especially, and if you can connect it to the excerpt you just read now and the bigger project that you're working on? I'll leave that to you. Over to you.
So it's a bit layered, and there's three, in a way, there's like 4 practices within it also. So there is decolonize, depatriarchalize, decommodify, and amongst that conversation also. And for me, at the heart of it, when I look at these practices, and of course there are others, not just these, it's around the question of how do you unestablish, how do you unlearn, how do you unhabit? Because sometimes when the word decolonial is spoken, I sometimes get the feeling like it's locked in history, as if it's something that happened a long time ago. And also then the engagement to it also becomes very high, like reproduces the drama triangle of, oppressor, victim, savior. Whereas I think decolonial is something that should be engaged with as a thinking, on all sectors. And it's something that is ongoing in various forms, including areas to do with migration, things like structural adjustment programs, things to do with how the dismantling of the post-colonial governments. There are so many, the impact of the Cold War also, which is often not talked about so much, and yet it had devastating effects in the majority world. And so I try to frame it as unestablishing. And then the question then I ask myself, which is, how do you unestablish yourself? Especially, so if given me, I was, I speak English. I was raised in with a framework of British colonial education and structure, and also raised Pentecostal Christian. And these elements are within me and operating in me for a long while before I was even able to articulate colonization. And even in school, there were even some elements where we were even discussing the benefits and versus the benefits and the impact, the good and the bad impact of colonization. And then later is when you start to ask yourself, like, come on, what was this? And then when I also started to travel, and it was the first time that I discovered that I'm Black, because in Kenya, you know, race is not the subject that we're busy with a lot. It's there, but what we are often busy with is ethnicity, and the dramas around that as well, and negative tribalism. And so, and also even that is a narrative that comes. So then the story itself is a response to all this, which is to say, how do you unestablish? And then I realized that on an individual level, perhaps the place to begin is the imagination, because it's how do you imagine away from those structures? And so the story itself is a quest, is of a character who goes on a quest to try to find who discovers that they're living in someone else's imagination. And they go on a quest to try and find an exit to this imagination, and then the complexity that comes with that. And it starts off in the Comoros, where there is a parallel migration crisis happening. And the idea is that the story will travel through the Swahili coast, from the south all the way to the border with Kenya and Somalia.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us that sort of initial framing around decolonization. I also know that when we talk about decolonization within the context of Africa, it's a different thing when it comes to, you know, the Americas, right? There are different inclination and connection and framing around this term. I'm going to come back to you to ask you the question, in what ways can the colonized narrative be decolonized? So just ruminate on that. But I want to go to Kofo.
Just ask again, in what ways?
In what ways can the colonized narrative be decolonized? Because you started on it already, so I will come back to it. I just wanted to start thinking about that. I want to go to Kofi. Kofi, yes.
Yeah, Kofi, yes.
Because I wanted to also speak to this question of decolonization within the framework of what you're doing. You are a sound engineer. You record sound and do research around that, and particularly with your connection to the project Performing Sustainability, Cultures and Development in West Africa. How do you frame all of these in your work within that? Are these even some of the subjects you talk about, and how does that connect to, you know, sustainability and discourse of climate change and all of that, and climate justice?
Thank you for your question. Let me answer this from a personal point of view before I go to the larger scale.
Absolutely.
So as a sound engineer, when you work with indigenes, you realize that their sound is different from the other people. The other people, let's say those who are more rural than those, if for lack of better term, those in the villages, because they are more closer to using indigenous instruments. For example, I was part of a research team that went around the coast of Ghana to record the songs of fishermen. And you realize that their practices, even though are not that indigenous, you realize that it has stayed close to its original state. So decolonization on a larger scale in what I do is now trying to make my music or make my work sound different. because everybody is trying to use the latest synths, the latest plugins, the latest European American plugins to make their sound more modern. But decolonization on my part would be trying to tell my artists that if we can go back and probably use older rhythms. For example, in Ghana, there are guitar progressions that started way back before colonization. For example, we have the Yam Ponsa guitar riff. If you're able to fuse it in these current songs, now even though, as I agree with what Ugut was saying, that decolonization is something we have to engage continuously. So as we are going, then we have to know where we started from, so that we know where we would go to. Knowing exactly well that we are not who we were, we are not who we used to be. So we should now know what was, what is, and so that we're able to know what we can be.
Interesting. What about your work, the performing sustainability? Because it also has to do with culture.
Yes.
Specifically West Africa. What's your framing? How do you consider decolonization within that?
So as you already know, in the project, I'm the data research manager. So I can talk based on the data I receive from the researchers. You notice that most of the projects the PhD students are doing are focused on sustainability, how to sustain and how to make sure that the practices that are living, even though are not what they used to be, continue on from where they have met, and if there are things that can be done to make it better. So for example, there was one PhD student who did a PhD on designing with waste. So in Ghana, we have sachet rubbers. So she built an entire drama stage out of these sachet rubbers. And when I got the data, I could realize that first thing, making the stage was difficult, because it was difficult for her to mold these things into these structures that people can stand and perform on. But you realize that she found the way, because she knew where she was from, and she now accepted how the thing is. Because whether we like it or not, in Ghana, everywhere you pass, you probably see waste. So what she asked herself is, now how would I make this thing better? So a lot of these students engage in decolonization in various ways in their work. I don't have their works offered, but the ones I have offered, they're the ones I've been able to say.
Thank you. It's really interesting that, of course, both of you said so many things. I'm just going to pluck out one of the things. The first thing is understanding who you are. And I think that that's really very critical. We may not agree on what decolonization is and what it is not, because it means different things across the world, but understanding who we are. And I love the framing that Mariah would be good to use, around depatriarchalize, decommodify. I think there are other two, you said there are four, but really looking at how do we
democratize.
De-democratize, right?
Democratize.
Democratize.
So decolonize, democratize, depatriarchalize, decommodify.
Good.
So they are framed also by a professor as well around this practice, who writes about also epistemicide, which is the killing off of knowledge systems
knowledge system, yes.
Through the colon. Because often we only think of, the material loss and loss of life. But we don't think about the killing off of knowledge systems and ways of being.
Yeah. And the reason why I kind of bring that forward is when we talk about decolonizing the colonized narrative, we have to consider this on the holistic, right? At the political, at the socio-economical, at the material and immaterial level. We have to unlearn, relearn, unestablish, decenter, and we can use different terms. I guess with that, I want to move to the next question. In what ways can decolonize the narrative or narratives be decolonized? And I would say that specifically, you may want to think first about your work, how you're doing that, and maybe even share the work of other people. I know that at the beginning, you mentioned Maraba, a room to try it out, sort of like experimentation, like it's like a laboratory, right? To use a different terminology, on English terminology, and the other one, Panda Chuka, up and down. In what ways are you? Maybe let's start with that. Are you decolonizing colonized? Are you decolonizing the colonized narratives in your own country, in your own vicinity, in your own world? And then from there, we can then take it a step further to say, can you also shed more light and other people that are your colleagues and those that are doing the same within your sphere of influence? I'll pass it on to you.
So maybe I will approach it from a from a personal history place. Yes. And then while talking about it, I'll also name the people who have influenced me in that journey. And then I will then talk about the practice in Mahabara. So there is a method which I developed within Mahabara called the Mahabara method that actually approach, like trying to find an actual approach, because often it's very theoretical and one struggles to know, like, what can I do on an individual or collective level. So my journey started, and of course it's longer, but I'll give the short, which is I was studying international relations and diplomacy with an interest in environmental science, and also connecting the interest in environment with studying conflict, because a lot of the conflicts in East Africa tend to be because of resource. They are resource-based conflict. So, and so while studying there, then there was a post-election dispute in Kenya in 2007 and 2008 that led into post-election violence that nearly evolved into a civil war in Kenya. And it was also, it was a shock to because it's a periodic, we have always periodic problems with our elections, but it was the first time that the violence spread countrywide. And what emerged out of that also is, like, for instance, when I was studying international relations, we describe, East Africa and the Horn of Africa and the Central and Great Lakes region as a region of hostile brothers, because there's quite a bit of conflicts happening in and around. And it was the first time that also Kenya becomes implicated in that in a very direct way. And it was also the first time that I start to become aware of identity, because in Kenya, a name can situate you in terms of your tribe or ethnicity. And actually, that's when I started to also change my name. So Moraya, for instance, is Bantu, and Ogutu is Nilotic, is Luo, Moraya is Kikuyu. And those were the two communities that have been historically, since the colonial period, been in this tug of war and conflict with each other. Partly also fueled by British divide and rule practice. And so this is where I start, because, it's one thing to study about conflict, but it's another thing to experience it live. And so I became involved in several projects as part of post-conflict reconstruction. So one of them was, a story by a Kenyan writer called Al Kags, who went around, and not just one story. So he went around collecting stories from the generation of our grandparents, and to hear, so the project is called Living Memories, and it was about hearing stories of people who lived, ordinary people who lived through the struggle for independence. And what that did for me was it helped make history become live. So it stopped being this distant thing, objective. It became personal, it had memory, it had sound, it had taste, it had people. And from there, I started to engage with the idea of politics of memory and the political in memory. So how do we remember what is left out, what is celebrated or put forward? And through that journey, then I engaged with James Baldwin, especially through his time in Paris. and he wrote a collection of essays, More Notes of a Native Son. And Nobody Knows My Name, More Notes of a Native Son. And through that collection of essays, I discovered one particular essay called Princes and Powers, which described a congress that took place in Paris in 1956 at the Sorbonne. And it was the first time a gathering of thinkers, philosophers, musicians, theologians of African descent meeting together and from all over. So artists of the Harlem Renaissance, artists from the Caribbean, the likes of Emi Césaire, artists from the Negritude movement in West Africa, artists from North and South, so, and also Afro-Europeans as well. So it was this gathering. And so it was the first time that I was also hearing these voices, because again, when you think about the politics of memory and what is remembered, is like I had studied international relations, but not encountered this event anywhere. And so that's really the place where I started my journey. So it's with this, it's with that buildup. And there are other projects that I engaged with well. And so what that led me towards is to then try to figure out a practice within which I can start to engage with this decolonial. And the first step was really, it's almost like, because I come also from a family of farmers, a small scale farmers. So, like when you're preparing land, the first step is you prepare land and then you seed, and then cultivate. So it was a question of, if we are to approach that within decolonial, what are the kind of key practices? So within Maabara and the Maabara method, we identified 6 areas. So one of them was self-discovery. So if you were to take the dictum, know thyself, seriously and sincerely, what would that produce? And really going deep. So we're talking even, having conversations with parents. So in our first cohort, for instance, we had 2 mothers who were exploring intergenerational trauma. And there was one who was exploring, she's called Wanjikoma Uganga, who was exploring 5 generations of women in her family and what that is like. So the process of self-discovery. Then the second one is a process. So one of the key components is that everything is process, and there's no this idea of arriving. So even within healing practices, there's no like, it's a process. Healing is a process, and it's something that you engage with continuously and consistently. And that's the same also with artistic practices as well. So it's process based. And what we say is that we produce someone's process rather than their product. And then we have play and curiosity, because I discovered, especially when you're dealing with heavy, intergenerational layers of, mess and complexities, that it can be very heavy on the mind, on the heart, on the body, on the soul. And so it's how to invite play and curiosity. There's a poet who talks about the responsibility to awe, so that it's not all doom, despair, and disaster. And then there are other elements like flow and also experimentation and the laboratory setting, the essence of Maabara as a room to try things out. So failure, for instance, is accepted. Like, when we went through the 844 system, like the education system in Kenya, that was designed through colonization, like failure was unacceptable, because it was all about changing and transforming the quote unquote indigenous into this civilized other. And so it was a very brutal process, even when I went to school, like putting discs around your neck when you spoke your mother tongue. So it's all these procedures, and that's really at the core of Maabara, but it's also really because it's informed by my artistic practice as well, very much. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. That's a lot. I'm going to come back to that, especially as it relates to Ecotheatre, and really digging deep into those practices. It seems you've created a body of not just a body of work, but a body of processes, and hopefully we can dig into that. I want to go to Kofi. based on your own work, in what ways are you decolonizing the colonized narrative? And we've all established what the colonized narrative is, particularly around colonization, what we have been told, who we have been told that we are, our identity, the language, literature over orature, being, our color and all of those things. For you as a sound artist, how are you doing that? How are you decolonizing the colonized narrative in the context of your work?
So I would probably toe the same line by Ogutu did, by telling a brief history of how I came into contact with decolonization. So personally, I came into decolonization when I was a teaching assistant in the University of Cape Coast, where I was part of a class that was centered around decolonization. So in that class, we had a lot of readings, and we had to now look at the readings and see what these people are telling us. So that's where I got to realize that even though we are different, we are differently similar. In the sense, you said something that how decolonization is seen in Africa is seen differently in the States or Canada. So I got to know decolonization when I was in class. Then the question that has stuck with me after the decolonization classes: why do you do what you do? Why do you do what you do? So the lecturer came to class and asked us, why do you wear suits to class? We have African prints, we have the normal Ghanaian attires. Why don't you wear that to class? Why do you wear that particular thing to class? Now, if you would go down and you realize that I am doing this because I was told to, then you question yourself, why did they say I should do that? Why didn't they tell me, okay, you're also like this? Why aren't you allowed to dress the way you feel comfortable? So that is where I came into the practice of decolonization. I came to learn about decolonization. And after that, I've been applying the principle of questioning almost everything I come into contact with. Because so if for any sound engineer starts as an apprentice to somebody, any sound engineer would start.
Can you hear me? It might be that we just lost Kofi there. Hopefully
Yes, I think I'm back.
Great. Okay.
Hello? Yes.
You were
So
at the point you were saying that every sound engineer starts as an apprentice.
Yes. So every sound engineer will start as an apprentice to learn the traits of the person you call your boss. Now, the question is, would you use what he did, or you now fine-tune it to suit yourself? Would you go the roots line, or you will now adopt what he did, what you have been taught over the years to suit your style? And also, I also teach some classes, so you realize that. And I'll always say most of I started teaching by learning from my boss. So I took it to class where I said, why would I have to teach the way he teaches? Why won't I learn and adopt to suit myself? So coming back to your question, how I have been applying this, I now live by, why do I do this and for what reason? Is it justifiable enough to me, or I'm doing it to please somebody else?
Interesting. Thank you to both of you. It's really, thanks for sort of taking a deeper dive into the history of, because I'm hearing a lot of how you acquire your knowledge and the hands and ropes that you've gone through to be able to arrive where you're at, and questioning self-discovery processes and experimentation and all of that. I want to go to Mabara, Udugutu, a room to try it out. What has that practice really taught you through the, in X number of years that you've studied this? The the fact that there is, failure is, is accepted, is acceptable, place for experimentation and exploration, self-discovery, identity, and all of that. What has that taught you over the years?
Yeah. Because also the practice is based, the Mahabara method is based also on my own investigations as well and my own practice. So maybe I'll start there and then I can lead to now, because then now it's a bit formalized, but before it was not formalized. Okay. It was more exploring and discovering in terms of the method itself. So what it has brought me, one of the things that it has brought me that I would say is concrete for me is this pivoting away from fear, being driven by fear, and being driven by curiosity, because those are very two drives. So in fact, if we were to use terms of ecology and climate crisis, is like being driven by fear is like you're burning bad fuel. It's like you're burning it's not environmentally sound, but yet burning curiosity is clean energy. It's very beautiful, and there are different types of curiosities as well. So that pivot was important, because one of the things that I acquired, especially through the education system, is this association of failure with pain and embarrassment and humiliation and shame and guilt complex. So, and that was really such a, because, like corporal punishment was allowed in the school system. You could be, so I'll give, for instance, an example of the school I went to in the primary level, where one of the practices, for instance, was during parade, the top 10 students would be called in front of the other students, and then the authorities would say, clap for them, and then they would call the bottom 10 students and then say, laugh at them, So this, because really it was almost seen like, so there was this consistent association of failure with pain and embarrassment and humiliation. So being able to just undo that as a first step was huge for me. And then, because it helps me even with Kofi, what Kofi was saying, why do you do what you do, even to get to the point where you ask yourself such questions and you ask them in a tone that is driven by friendly curiosity and interest and engagement, then you're able to go deeper into the question and to the layers of it. Whereas if you're driven by fear, it goes back to the answer that also Kofi made, which is I am doing this because I was told to. And then it's also how you are told to is through often violence and humiliation. And so it's untangling that. And then what happened now within the Mahabara is, once I started to sort of understand and embody these ideas, I wanted to create a space in which I can share them with other artists and other thinkers and other, collaborators locally and internationally as well. So then it was about how to, and then also to kind of create a toolbox. So I call them like practices, like a manuscript for unlearning, so that, we can start to build a very practical toolbox. Because a lot of them, the things we're also fighting and facing are like invincible monsters. And this, so for instance, one project I'm doing also is like trying to say, if we need new myths, we also need new monsters. And it's also to create a, within also the language of orature and literature, to create a new class of monsters. So one of them, for instance, I call Ne'anoaya, which means not enough and not okay as you are. So it's like this monster that constantly whispers in your ear, inside you. It's like a parasite. You're not enough and not okay as you are. Your skin color is not enough. Your knowledge is not enough. Your way of being is not enough and not okay. Your language is not enough. Your histories are not enough. So it's like, because sometimes it's also good to conjure these things so that we can see them, and give them form in orature technology, things that we can then, then you can start to look at it and to kind of disempower these like that monster. How do you work with it? Because it's also, the weird thing about it is that it comes as friendly advice, and that's also the weird thing about the white man's burden, right? It's like we were doing this for the good of humanity, and it's like, no, like
saving them.
Yeah.
Interesting. I want to come back to maybe because we've not even talked about Ecotheatre, and we have less than 10 minutes. But what you're speaking to are some of the values some of the values guiding your own framing of your work. Maybe quickly, how does that come across in your work around Ecotheatre? And then after that, I'll pass it on to Kofi.
So I'll give a concrete example, which is a collaboration project I worked with the Wangari Maathai Foundation. And for those of you who know or may not, Wangari Maathai was she passed away, but her spirit is still within, and she was a great fighter for the environment, for freedom, for the support of regenerative practices in growing, in planting trees, in conservation. And she loved this story very much. That when I was starting to research, the story actually comes from South America. But I think she encountered it in Japan. And it's a story of a hummingbird where there's a forest fire that erupts, and all the animals leave the forest except this little hummingbird that goes and keeps taking water and pouring into these huge, massive fires. And then the hummingbird is called and asked, like, what are you doing? It's a big fire, you're a tiny creature, like you can do nothing. And then the hummingbird responds, I am doing the best I can. And sometimes that's what Wangari was saying, we are all called to do the best we can. And so what we did together with the Wangari Maathai Foundation, and also a musician, and also a poet and a writer, performer, so it was a team. We created, because one of the practices I have is multiplicity of perspectives, is how do you take a story and look at it from multiple perspectives. So for instance, this story, we took it and then tried to retell it through multiple perspectives. So for instance, from the perspective of fire as a destructive force, from the perspective of the hummingbird, so it can be also abstract, like from the perspective of an idea within, like the kind of defeatist idea, or the powerlessness, the sense of powerlessness that the animals were projecting. And through retelling it, and also from a futuristic perspective. So Sitawa Namwali approached the story from years later, when the forest has completely burnt down and the space has been turned into a city. And the hummingbird is moving through this city and kind of remembering the forest as it was. And also the pollution that comes with the rivers, especially in city environments, because it's one of the huge problems as well. And so through this multiplicity, and it's really part of also polyvocality. It's like, because it's like, if you want to understand something, it's best to look at it from multiple perspectives. And then we can be able to actually say, okay, now I can begin to see this, whether it's an issue. And so applying that through practice is one of the ways that I approach my Ecotheatre.
Thank you. I know you've sort of spoken to the question, how can environmental stewardship and sustainability be recentered in African theater? And part of what I'm hearing is that pluriverse, that multiplicities of ideas and perspective. I want to go to Kofi, and I'll also say that if we have questions, please send it our way. We have 6 more minutes, and we aim to end on the top of the hour. So please, if there's any question, please send it our way to our viewers. Over to you, Kofi. What are the values that are guiding your own framing, and what do you think environmental stewards and need to recenter as they think about their working on the continent of Africa, particularly in the context of theater. But it doesn't have to be theater. There are other kind of, because you're a sound artist. So in your world, what would that look like?
Personally, one of the major values that guide my thinking about climate change is the oneness of everything. How we are all connected with everything, and how we are connected with nature. In Ghana, when the traditionalists are pouring libation, they first pour libation to the goddess of the earth, Asasea. So thinking about that, I realized that if I'm able to see nature as part of myself, I wouldn't want to hurt myself. If you understand what I'm trying to say, if it's an extension of myself, would I like to eat polluted things? No. Would I like to do things that will hurt myself? I wouldn't do. And when you come down to most Ghanaian folk tales, there are a whole lot of stories where you realize that on face value, you would think that they are just stories, but if you really sink down, you realize that they have deep connotations about how to gradually reduce the impacts of climate change. Because, for example, in Ghana, there are some trees that you don't cut down discriminately. You have to perform a whole lot of rites to that particular tree before you cut it. And if you look to the surface value, you might think, why would I have to go and do this at this time? But if you think on a larger scale of climate change, you realize that it's serving as a source of keeping this tree alive. And I'm close to the fishing community in Cape Coast. There are specific days they don't go for fishing. And once they came to record their songs, and we had the discussions with them, and they told us that they can look at the moon and tell us today there won't be any fish, so we won't go for fishing. And this is helpful because if they go to fish at that particular day, they'll probably catch those fingerlings, the little ones, which would now deplete the sources for future generations. So for me, what I think stewards should do is to incorporate more African stories into, if it's theater, incorporate more African stories into most of the theater works they do, and also know that we are one with everything.
Thank you so much. I know we're 2 minutes, and we'll ensure that we end at the top of the hour. I'm hearing a lot of piece around multiplicity and of perspectives, and I think that's critical. I'm also hearing the idea that when we have to consider our connection to the land, to water, to the resources, to these resources. And whatever we're doing, we have to think in an holistic sense, not just in just the sense of one way, but and also to incorporate a lot of the Africans' knowledge systems, epistemes, ideologies, and different things like that. Interestingly, Professor Wangari Maathai was one of those that we mentioned last week, and Aliya Kasam, our guest, also spoke about the same, the story of the hummingbird. So it's coming again back today, which is interesting, because I think that story is very practicable. It's very practical, rather, in terms of us taking active steps, one after the other. Do your best, all right? Tell your story, but let your story that you will tell be in sync with those ideas that we presented. I want to say thank you to both of you.
Sorry, Wangari also says, just short, like you have to keep at it until it becomes rooted. So also it's about,
consistency,
understanding the dynamics of intensity and consistency so that, we keep at it. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. I think this is the consistency and intensity is really critical. I'd like to say thank you to both of you for taking the time to chat with us today. Thank you to HowlRound for creating the platform. Thank you to Center for Sustainable Practices for the Arts, Center for Social Engaged Theater, Theater Mission International. Thanks to Flor for putting everything together, for managing this, and thank you to Trini and Ingrid, who are interpreter, and to a captioner. We're going to be here again next week, same time, for the third episode, and we're hoping that will be an opportunity to go deeper into the conversation. Thank you to Thea from HowlRound, and then with that, I would say do have a blessed day wherever you may be. And then again, once again, thank you so much, and I hope that we can take all of these ideas here and there and apply that in our own work. So thank you once again, and have a great day. Bye, everyone.